What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. You know what, guys? Some of your questions lead to some of my favorite videos to make, and this is no exception. I recently had somebody, actually two people, in a really short period of time between the two. But the question was, how do you use the paddle shifters to drive spiritedly? Good question. I think there's a lot of guys and gals out there that would love to use the paddle shifters, but just don't because they're not comfortable doing it. And I think the paddle shifters are like one of the most enjoyable parts of this car. And if you're a non-sport Q50, you should definitely do the installation because it's super easy and it doesn't cost all that much. I use the paddle shifters every day, all day, and enjoy it thoroughly. And I think, like I said, that some just don't use them that much because they just aren't really sure how to do it. I think those of us that have driven manual transmission cars in the past take that a little bit for granted, whereas those of us that have not experienced driving a stick shift car, just like I said, may not know exactly how to use these. So today I'm just going to go quickly through how you would drive the vehicle with the manual paddle shifters just in regular driving situations, but then also kind of go over real quick how I like to use the paddle shifters in more of a spirited driving situation. So there's just a couple of things to keep in mind when you're in manual mode using the paddle shifters or using the stick. Number one is don't take your foot off the throttle when you're upshifting. It's much different in a manual transmission car, obviously, when you take your foot off the throttle to depress the clutch. The transmissions work in different ways. You have a valve body in the 7-speed automatic transmission which directs hydraulic fluids under pressure, and your transmission works in communication with your throttle, and it's relative to your throttle position and all of that kind of stuff. So you want to keep the pressure on the system, which helps your transmission shift crisply and cleanly and effectively. And if you especially are in the higher RPM range and then you take your foot off the throttle when you try to upshift, you're going to hear major delays. It's going to almost sound like your transmission is slipping. It doesn't work as it should. So keep your foot on the throttle. Number two is that the car will downshift automatically for you. The car is going to downshift as you work down in the RPM range. We'll talk more about this later on, but you don't have to worry about it. I do let off the throttle when I downshift. The car rev matches for you also. You don't have to control the throttle when you're downshifting, and you'll see what I mean when we talk more about that. Another thing is that the car does not like half-assed shifts. So if you're at wide open throttles, especially, don't shift at 4,000 RPM. It's going to be rough. Just let it wind out. The same is true if you're at half throttle or 3/4 throttle. Don't let it rev up slowly to the higher RPM range and then try to shift. Just like I said, the transmission operates with a valve body and hydraulic fluids under pressure. So if you're at wide open throttle, wind it out. Don't try to early shift. It'll be rough. You'll get a clunk and you'll get a jolt, especially between third and fourth gear. Another thing to keep in mind as we talk more about the spirited driving situations is that in a spirited driving scenario, whether you're in the mountains or twisty roads, you're probably going to be hanging out in second and third gear. Remember, the top of second gear is 60 mile an hour. So if you're at the top of third gear, you're at 80, 90 mile an hour, and the chances that you get that fast in the mountains, unless you're in the canyons of California on those long windy roads, you're probably not going to reach that point. So you're going to be in second or third gear. So you're not going to be going through all the gears or back down through all the gears. So there's not a lot to think about other than just controlling your RPM range in those two gears. One other important thing to note in this car is there is a slight delay in shifting. So you want to give yourself a little bit of cushion before redline. I typically, if I'm winding the car out, I'll shift at 71, 7200 RPM and then hit the paddle. And at that point, it'll shift right at redline. Again, driving this 7-speed automatic is much different than driving a manual transmission car. You can rev it right to the point where you want to shift, and then you take your foot off the gas and depress the clutch. So it's a very quick motion, but your RPM stops right when you want it to stop. When you're doing a no-lift shift in the 7-speed auto, your RPM is going to continue to go. So you don't get the delay of lifting your foot off the gas. So when you hit that paddle, it's going to be a split second, but there is going to be a delay where your RPM continues to rise. And you don't want to shift right at 7,500 RPM, then hit the paddle, because you're going to hit rev limiter. That's going to, you know, hinder your momentum. It's going to cause a little bit of a blip in your momentum. So if you're really trying to go hard at the drag strip or get a good 0 to 60 time, you want to time it just right. Also, the right paddle plus is upshift, left paddle minus downshift. All right, so I'm going to put it in manual mode right there. Puts it in first gear, and we're going to just do regular driving to get an idea of how to use the paddle shifters just in normal everyday driving situations. All right, we're at a stoplight, and we're just going to accelerate. And again, if you don't have experience driving a manual transmission car, this might be a little bit of a foreign concept to you, but you know, just your average regular cruise, I will shift up to second gear, you know, at 2,500, 3,000 RPM. You don't really have to wind it up to 3,000. You can shift a lot sooner than that, but you know, I like to hear the car. And then you can see the car will downshift automatically by itself. As I said, the car automatically downshifts for you, but if you like to, you know, hear a little bit of a rev match and like to do the downshifting by yourself, this becomes important, particularly in those spirited driving scenarios. But generally, what you can do in terms of timing would be compare your mile per hour with your RPM. So if you're in fourth gear at 40 miles an hour like I am right now, but I wanted to slow down, or I'm coming to a stop sign and I'm gradually slowing down, I would shift down to third gear at about 30 miles an hour. Look at the car just did it by itself. But like the same would be true from third to second. I'm at 20 miles an hour, I downshift to second. So 20 mile an hour, downshift to second gear. So again, we're at about 30 mile an hour in third gear, but I want to slow down, or I need to slow down slowly. We get close to 20, I downshift to second. You get the small RPM jump with the slight rev match. And now we're back on the throttle. This is just more of a leisurely cruise, right? So again, shifting at 2,800 RPM, 3,000 RPM, something in that range, kind of, you know, a cruising speed, 35, 40 mile an hour, right at 2,000 RPM. So actually third gear is perfect on a road like this. It allows you, in a kind of a straight situation, it allows you to wind it out a little bit, but it still keeps you in a good RPM range when you take some of the curves. So if I was really pushing on this road right now, third gear would be perfect. And then you come up to a turn like this, where a downshift to second would be perfect. Going with one hand is not going to happen right now, but you know, changing between third and second is all you're really going to do on a road like this. See, I mean, third gear is plenty here. This might be sort of a weird angle, but it'll at least allow you to see what my hands are doing. So we're heading up to some more twisty roads. I'm in first gear right now, so just keep that as a reference point. There's about a 3,400 RPM shift. Again, 3,400, 3,500 RPMs. Now we're in third gear, which, like I said, is probably where you'd want to hang out in a scenario like this, All roads will be different. You'll just have to kind of get a feel for, you know, where you'll be at in your RPM range. Again, you want to keep it in the power band as much as you possibly can if you're going for a spirited driving experience. Now this is a relatively high trafficked road. I just saw some bicyclists heading up this direction, so see there, I shifted at about 4,500, 5,000 RPM into fourth gear, which I wouldn't need to do if I was really trying to keep my RPM up and racing. But again, you know, high trafficked area, we're not going insane. But third, again, I'm going to downshift here. Right now we're at 3,000 RPM cruising, but wind it out, come to a corner, and I'm just staying in third, and this is perfect. Tight corner, downshift. Bicyclists, here we are. Beautiful. I don't know if you guys are familiar with cycling at all, but this is George Hincapie in front of me. He lives up here in this area. Used to cycle for U.S. Postal Service and Lance Armstrong. I don't know if that sounds familiar to you at all. At them. This is what sucks about this area. I'm all for people cycling, but geez, alright, we'll just head back down in this direction. Again, starting out, we're in second gear. If I was racing, this is probably where I'd be, second gear, but I'm not. So we're just having a nice little spirited drive on the Twisty Roads. Third gear is perfect, unless you come to a real tight corner and you want to downshift and accelerate out. But third keeps me right at that 3,000 RPM range, which is just fine. Right here you could downshift a second if you wanted to, but third, still plenty peppy. Car's happy in this range. And don't forget, the VQ's torque comes in right around 3,000, 3,500, maybe 4,000 RPM, and that's what's going to help you pull out of those tight corners, not so much the high RPM horsepower. Lots of traffic, so you can't be stupid out here. So that road, that part I could have hit fourth on, but we would have had to downshift to third, probably second right here. And coming to a stop sign. This is sort of an awkward video to make because there's no real good spot to put the camera, unless you had somebody else filming for you, which is maybe what I have to do in a follow-up video, but I hope this is helpful. Another thing I'd want to say is don't go crazy shifting all over the place. As you can tell on that road, I was saying, staying in third gear for a vast majority of the time. Some of the real tight corners, downshifting in the second. Sometimes on a longer straightaway, I'd have enough room to rev it out and shift into fourth, but you're not constantly shifting. That's way too much strain on your transmission. I've seen videos of it, of other people in the mountains, in a Q50 in particular, shifting just constantly, not even using the paddle shifter, using the stick shift, and constantly switching gears. And what happened? Eventually, his transmission went out. It's just too much work when it's not necessary. Just shift when you absolutely have to. So I'm in third gear. I let it wind up a little bit more, 3,200 RPM there. The car sounds good, so I could probably shift at 2,000 RPM. That's probably what your transmission does on its own, just under light load. Probably better for fuel mileage as well. I have no idea where I am, by the way. God, George, you really messed me up. Cyclists. Coming to a stop. Down to third gear at 30. Down to second gear at 22. You can hear the rev match. And then when you come to a stop, the car will shift to first for you. Don't downshift to first gear. You don't ever need to downshift to first gear. Taking off from a stoplight. I hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving. I appreciate you guys following along. If there's any interest at all in me doing a more in-depth video on how to use paddle shifter specifically in more spirited driving situations, please let me know in the comments down below. I'll definitely put one together with an extra set of hands so we can get a little more detail in terms of when and how and all of those types of things. I'm glad to do it. So thank you guys very much for following along. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.